Hello, and welcome back to Growing Up Late. How many times have you had something you absolutely needed to say, but you rehearsed it over and over again in the shower, in the car, maybe with friends, not because you didn't know what you wanted to say, but because you wanted to avoid making anybody feel uncomfortable with your words, your truth? I used to think that if I shaped my words just so perfectly, I would have the best possible reaction or outcome. And now I have a different gauge. And that would be, do I have to say this? Do I need to say this? Is this something that I just will regret and won't be able to live without saying it? Well, in that case, I think you have to say what you need to say. And I got some good examples from other people about this throughout my life before I learned it myself. I remember many years ago, I had moved halfway across the country. I was young, I was newly married, I was expecting my first baby. I felt like I was a million miles away from home and disconnected from everyone and everything, especially my mother. And back then, phones still hung on a wall and they were attached to them. Sometimes you had a very long cord, but it was still attached to the wall. And long distance was long distance. It wasn't free, it wasn't unlimited talk time. It was pay by the minute and pay quite a bit when I reflect back on what it was. And I was talking to my mother one time, and I really needed her then. And I remarked on the fact that she must be running up quite the long distance bill, and she didn't need to do that on my account. And she said, I have learned a truth that we are only here for so long on this earth, and we will be silent for a long time. So I'm going to speak while I'm able to speak. That whole you're a long time silent. Say what you need to say now really stuck with me. So there's this false promise, right? That if I do use my voice, I can control an outcome. And that is a very false promise because I can rehearse for days and weeks and years the thing I need to say more than anything. And I can still get an outcome that I don't want. The marriage will end. The other person will become angry, disillusioned. I will be misunderstood despite saying as clearly and as perfectly as I think I can manage the thing I need to say. I can still be misunderstood. And sometimes it seems like it would be easier to stay silent, but silence is not neutral. It isn't staying quiet doesn't have no effect. It can be a sacred thing, some grace, not saying the hurtful word, not reacting quickly, pausing, avoiding hurting someone's feelings. Or it can be something that makes you shrink. Sometimes silence is just fear all dressed up like politeness, which isn't the same thing. And I always have to decide which one I'm choosing if I'm not going to use my voice, if I'm going to remain silent. Sometimes it might be because someone else is more qualified to say it, or it really isn't my place. But other times it's self silencing. And there's a big difference between keeping a peace and self abandonment. It's that difference between wisdom or fear posing as politeness. Women are taught from a pretty young age to keep the peace, to manage reactions, to maintain the status quo, keep a situation just so. Oftentimes that comes at the cost of self silencing. And I know what that looked like for me. I had a partner and I did this thing completely absent-minded. I was a pretty happy, joyful person, and I whistle absent-mindedly without even thinking about it. I don't know if I'm often aware that I'm even doing it, but I whistle. And it's just something I do throughout the day. A song pops into my head, or I don't know, but I think it's a sign that I'm feeling happy. And somebody told me that it hurt their ears. So for an entire year, I policed myself. The whole time we were in that relationship, I stopped whistling for a whole year. I just gave it up. And that's just one of the many little ways that I shrink myself, cause less of a problem by being too much me. What a terrible thing. And I think there's a lot of ways that we do this. We try not to think about it, but it's there. That example was right on the tip of my tongue because I'm very aware that I did that to myself and I regret it. That was definitely self-abandonment, not keeping peace. At some point, I have to decide, am I going to silence myself to keep other people comfortable? So I have learned to speak up, and I have more than my fair share of examples where speaking up, I would say they were speak up for yourself fails, initially, anyways. I had a boss one time, and he was pushing me, not so gently, to do business with a certain client. And I felt like there was just something not quite right. And I really didn't think it was in the best interest of me or the business. But I liked getting promoted and I liked being liked by my managers. So I held back on saying anything for a while until I realized this is going to really cause me a problem. I just can't live with this. And I spoke up and I was rewarded for speaking up by being transferred. And first, I thought, well, I failed. I didn't accomplish what I wanted to accomplish, but I did because I wasn't in that situation any longer. So, not so much a fail. And happily, I can report down the road that other people saw the same business deal the way I did, and it was long since rectified, right? So, it wasn't an immediate win, but it needed to be done. And if I hadn't said anything, I don't know if I could have lived with myself. I had an experience where I worked with a nonprofit and they were withholding certain information from the people who needed the information to play their roles in ensuring the success and perpetuity of the mission. I don't think it was a very popular stance, but I stood up and said, we don't have the right information to do our jobs. We need more transparency. I will tell you, I did that a little bit shakily inside. Inside, I felt that, but apparently not so much on the outside. And my reward for that was a definite outburst from a different opinion, kind of came at me like a wave. And it didn't go my way. I think there was a lot of emotion involved, but I had said what I needed to say. And I felt good about that. And within the next 2 years, that information started being made available on a regular basis. So again, short-term embarrassment, loss, I wouldn't have changed it for the world because long term it did have an impact on the organization in a really positive way. That isn't why I did it though. I did it because it needed to be said. And no one else seemed to want to say it. So I took my turn standing up and speaking the truth. It's funny because I've been in other situations where I've had a very strong opinion about something, how it needed to go in a social group or a community group, in a business meeting. And what I found is that regardless of the outcome, if I speak up and say, this is how I feel about this, especially if I have a stake in what the organization or the group or the business is doing, if I speak up and say, this is how I feel, if there's a vote taken and it goes the other way, I can live with it. I've given my best ideas, and everyone in the room gets to weigh out how they feel about it. And the outcome, hopefully, is what's best for everybody, if that's the way it goes. And I've had some things where that's happened. And again, I'm grateful that I spoke my piece because I can live with things not going my way. I can't live with self-betrayal when I think something's important to me and I have a stake in it. So the actual goal, I think, is self-trust more than winning or losing. Because at the end of the day, most of the time, we don't remember always who won or who lost the thing. It's not always a big dramatic event to just speak up and say what's on our hearts or minds. But what happens every time I do that is I gain trust in myself and an assurance to myself, sometimes a reminder that I will never leave myself alone in the room again. I won't be the first person out the door on me. And I did that. And I regret those things much more than I regret speaking up and not getting my way, because it just isn't about that. It isn't about getting my way. It's about saying the thing that if I don't say it, I will regret it. Maybe you're carrying a truth, something that's on your heart that you need to say. It's funny because there are times when I think, I don't really need to say that. I can live without saying that. But it's still in the back of my mind. So it's not settled, it's not resolved, and it isn't really a closed matter. It's still right there, rolling around in my head. If I could say this, if I could say that, maybe this, maybe that, maybe it would be different. It's still this conversation in my head, in my spirit, where it's an unrest. There's an internal tension inside of me because when you know you need to say something and you don't, it's still there. We aren't really suppressing anything. And if we think we are, we're kind of lying to ourselves. So while you may not be able to control the outcome of what happens once those words escape your lips, you will be able to make a decision to speak your truth and decide that keeping yourself quiet to make yourself acceptable to others or to make other people feel comfortable is no longer a thing you want to do. Maybe it's a boundary, a request, an ask of somebody. Maybe it's a goodbye. Things aren't working out. Maybe it's even an apology and it just sits with you and nags. Well, based on my experience, you are a long time silent. So say what you need to say.